right, and welcome back to week 12 here in plant biology. We're finishing up our reading in the Biology 2E textbook, chapter 25, section 3, so 25.3, the bryophytes in the Biology 2E textbook. Again, this is a continuation of part 1 of the lecture. Excuse me. And really what we're doing here is looking at the bryophytes, which are these very early, or they're very primitive anyways, plants that are good representations of what early invaders from aquatic habitats onto land habitats would have looked like. Bryophytes are a very diverse group, so there are many, many different types, more than 25,000 species, and they have lived on every single imaginable terrestrial habitat really for 450 million years. So they've been around for a long, long, long time. With bryophytes, we have the gametophyte generation being the dominant life stage that we see out in the environment. And these gametophyte generations are one end, and they produce spores that then are then need to be fertilized, but these male spores anyways are flagellated and have to swim through a moist environment before they can reach the female gamete to fertilize. So all of these bryophytes are going to require at least a moisture-rich stage for reproduction. We do see some desert mosses and things like that that just dry up into brown crusts, but when they do get wet, they will reproduce in these similar sorts of ways when there is adequate hydration, which is not always the case in the desert, but they have overcome the consistency issue of hydration by making sure that they are resistant to desiccation and can rapidly rehydrate when conditions are right. So when we do get these fertilization events, we get the development of, again, the sporophyte. And the sporophyte then produces spores that have been developed through the process of meiosis. So they're back to one end. Those spores then spread to the environment and grow into a new gametophyte generation. So we have this alternation of generations within the gametophytes, and they all follow a similar sort of life history path. The first group of bryophytes that we're going to talk about specifically are the liverworts, or the Marchantiophyta. These are really what we're looking at are the very most primitive sorts of land plants that we see. They are non-vascular. They do not have vascular tissue, and they have some rather strange look to them. They're very inconspicuous. Oftentimes you'll see these if you go for a hike or something like that, and you'll see them growing on a moist rock face. You can often see these liverworts, and very often you've probably overlooked them in the past. I hope that you use learning about these organisms to, when you do see them, say, that's a liverwort. I know that, and I learned that. So that's something that I hope you get from this class. Around Iowa, this part of Iowa anyway, I know I've seen them out at Backbone State Park for sure, along the bluffs there. So if you're out for a hike, look there. I've seen them in central Illinois, Virginia, so they're all over the place, but they tend to be inconspicuous. So go out and look for them. They're an interesting part of the flora of the place in which you live. With the liverworts, we do get this alternation of generation, so we see this dominant gametophyte generation with this stalked sporophyte generation, which then releases sperm out into the environment for reproduction. But we also have the capacity for asexual reproduction through these structures called gemicups, and they are little cups that hold water and little multicellular chunks that then will be washed off into the environment, and they can reproduce asexually as well. The hornworts are the next group of bryophytes we're going to talk about, and these may be the most obscure of the bryophytes, with liverworts being a close second. Mosses you're all probably at least somewhat familiar with. These hornworts require moist habitats, and they're never far from their water source. They again are gametophyte dominant, so the bulk of what we see are the gametophytes, but the sporophytes themselves are going to grow off, and that's where the name comes from, because they kind of look like horns that come out of the gametophyte generation. Again, they also have this general pattern of alternation of generations and production of meiotic spores and things like that we've seen with these other groups. The third and final group that we're going to talk about are the mosses, and you are all probably familiar with mosses. They're available in almost every habitat imaginable, from urban landscapes to rural landscapes, hot, cold, wet, dry. Mosses are capable of growing, at least whether they thrive or not is different, but capable of growing in many different types of habitat. They are, however, non-vascular. Some of them will have some sort of rudimentary vascular-like structure, but we don't see the development of true vascular systems in the mosses. But they all, at some stage, do require this moisture for these reproductive activities, like we've seen. They require this moist habitat for sperm to swim and come into contact with the other gametes. Mosses are also important in that they form sort of the base vegetation for what are often brand new habitats. They don't have true roots. They have what are called rhizoids, so they can grow very shallowly. They don't require deep penetration into the soil to grow like a big robust tree. They can really stay at the surface. So if there's a new open habitat, say a rock face or something like that, mosses will be able to colonize those areas before more developed plants, because they do have these simpler structures and they have simpler needs. As these mosses stay in a place, they often form the foundation of these successional layers by accumulating organic matter. They build up the soil in a new place, and they really can form the foundation of a entirely new ecosystem. And that's a major role that they provide in areas that are completely cleared in these successional sorts of questions. Mosses have this standard sort of alternation of generation, with the gametophyte generation being dominant and the sporophyte generation being totally dependent energetically on the gametophyte, and they simply send up this little stalk and release their one-end spores out into the environment for colonizing new habitats. Again, it's the same sort of cycle that we've seen in these other bryophytes. Same holds true with the mosses. Bryophytes tend to be an inconspicuous and underappreciated group of plants, but they really represent the foundation of movement of organisms from photosynthetic organisms from aquatic habitats onto terrestrial habitats. And so they are an important component of the flora in a place, and they can be quite beautiful, although often underappreciated and underrepresented. All right, that ends week 12's lecture. We'll meet back week 13 and talk about the seedless vascular plants, but for now, that's enough for this week, and I'll talk to you later.